They abandoned the injured alien rebel. But a human refused to leave her behind. Sergeant Jack Callahan crouched behind the debris of what used to be a high-tech alien outpost. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and scorched earth. His team had successfully planted the explosives on the enemy's communication tower, but something felt off. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this mission wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. The crackle of his radio broke through the silence, followed by the cold voice of Commander Davies. "Callahan, it's time to move. We've done our job. Head to the extraction point. We're pulling out now." Jack glanced at the rest of his squad. They were already packing up, preparing for the long trek back to the dropship. But Jack's eyes weren't focused on the equipment. His attention was drawn to the wreckage in the distance, where the sounds of fighting had just moments ago echoed through the valley. His team had encountered a group of alien rebels. Their mission was clear: help them overthrow the empire that had enslaved their people. But something had gone wrong. The rebels had been ambushed, and the surviving members were now scattered, trying to escape the tightening noose of the empire's forces. And then Jack saw her. Rana, a young alien rebel, lay injured on the ground, her body barely moving. Her people had been fighting for freedom against the empire for years. Jack had heard stories of their bravery, their relentless pursuit of a better future. But now, one of them was bleeding out, left behind by the same coalition forces she had hoped would save her. "Callahan, are you there?" Commander Davies' voice again, more insistent this time. "Yeah, I hear you," Jack responded, but his gaze remained fixed on the injured rebel. His mind was racing, torn between his duty to follow orders and his moral compass, which was screaming at him to do something. "Leave her, Callahan. She's not our problem. We've got our mission, and that's what matters. Now get to the extraction point, or I'll leave without you." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The words felt wrong, like they didn't belong to the person he had known for years. Commander Davies had always been pragmatic, but this was something else. This was cold, calculating, but Jack couldn't do it, not this time. Without saying another word, he pulled his rifle up, checked the safety, and began making his way toward the injured rebel. The ground was uneven, and every step felt like it took an eternity. The forest around him was dense, the trees massive and strange, their twisting branches creating shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The sounds of the battle were fading, but Jack could still hear the occasional crack of a weapon going off in the distance. His pulse quickened. He wasn't sure how long he had before the Empire's forces found him, but he wasn't going to leave a fellow soldier to die in a field like this. As he approached, he could see Rana's chest rising and falling, but it was slow, labored. Blood stained the ground around her, and her arm was twisted in an unnatural way. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, locking with Jack's. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack kneeled beside her, his fingers brushing against her skin. "I'm here to help you. You're not alone." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment he saw a flicker of distrust in them. It made sense. She had no reason to trust a human. After all, humans and her kind had been enemies for years, but Jack wasn't here to fight her. He was here to do what was right, even if his commander wouldn't agree. "I have to get you out of here," Jack said, his voice steady despite the urgency building in him. Rana shook her head weakly. "You can't. The Empire's soldiers. They're everywhere. You'll never make it." "I didn't come this far just to turn my back on someone in need," Jack replied firmly. "I'll get you to safety." He carefully lifted her, wincing as her body seemed to go limp in his arms. Despite the pain that she must have been in, she didn't fight him. There was something about the way she looked at him, as if she understood that he was different from the others. Maybe, for a moment, she saw a glimpse of humanity in him. With Rana cradled in his arms, Jack stood up, trying to ignore the pain in his legs from kneeling for too long. He had to move quickly. The longer they stayed here, the more likely it was that the Empire's forces would close in. The dropship was still a long way off, and they'd have to navigate through dangerous terrain to get there. Jack checked his weapon again, then turned his attention to the path ahead. The forest was dense, but Jack had been trained to survive in hostile environments. He knew how to move silently, how to avoid detection. He could do this. As he moved, Rana's breathing grew heavier. Jack had no idea how long she'd been out in the field, but he could tell that the wound in her side was severe. If he didn't get her medical attention soon, she wouldn't make it. The thought made him quicken his pace. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "You're going to be okay." But even as he said the words, Jack knew that it wasn't going to be easy. The Empire's forces were relentless. They would hunt them down. He could only pray that his squad would hold off long enough for him to get to the extraction point. If not, he would have to make a stand. There was no way he was going to leave her behind. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had begun to blur. The only thing that mattered was getting Rana to safety. Finally, as the sky began to turn a dark shade of purple, Jack spotted a clearing up ahead, the extraction point. But there were no soldiers waiting for him, no rescue, just the sound of wind whistling through the trees. Jack stopped, his heart sinking. Something wasn't right. He laid Rana down gently and pulled out his radio. "Davies, do you copy?" There was a long pause before the static cleared and the voice of his commander came through. "Callahan, you're too late. The mission's over. We've already left. You're on your own." Jack's grip tightened around the radio. He felt a surge of anger rise within him. They had abandoned him, abandoned Rana, left them to die in this god-forsaken place. But Jack didn't care about that now. He wasn't going to give up, not on Rana, not on what was right. "Copy that," he said, his voice cold. "I'll handle it myself." He closed the radio and turned to Rana, her eyes flickering open again, barely able to stay conscious. "I won't leave you," he promised her, his voice steady. "Not now, not ever." And in that moment Jack made a vow. He would not allow her sacrifice to be in vain. The Empire would pay. And no matter the odds, he would do whatever it took to make sure that Rana and the rebellion she fought for would have a chance at survival. Jack's hands were shaking as he adjusted Rana's position in his arms. He had to be strong for her, but inside, doubt and fear gnawed at him. The Empire's forces weren't just a few soldiers here and there, they were everywhere. The vast alien jungle surrounding them seemed to stretch on forever, a dangerous, untamed wilderness filled with predators and traps. And that wasn't even the worst of it. The Empire would be hunting them down now, watching every move, waiting for any sign of weakness. Jack glanced around. The path ahead was not clear. The jungle was thick with vines and underbrush, the trees towering above like ancient giants. He could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of twigs underfoot, but there was nothing else. The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sound that mattered was the soft, labored breathing of the alien rebel in his arms. He needed to move, and quickly. He couldn't stay here too long, and every second felt like a lifetime. Jack looked down at Rana, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her eyes were half-lidded, and she looked like she might pass out at any moment. He had to get her somewhere safe. "I'm going to get you out of here," Jack whispered, more to himself than to her. She didn't respond, but the faintest flicker of her eyes told him she was still aware of him, still hanging on. He began walking, carefully stepping over rocks and fallen branches, making sure not to make a sound. The jungle was filled with dangers, wild animals, hidden traps, and the ever-present threat of the Empire's patrols. They had to stay hidden. The minutes stretched into hours as Jack moved through the dense foliage, each step a struggle. His legs were sore, his body tired, but the weight of responsibility kept him going. He couldn't stop. Not now. He glanced at the sky above. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow through the trees. The darkness of night was closing in fast, and the jungle would become even more dangerous once it was fully dark. Jack had to find shelter, somewhere to rest, somewhere to hide. He couldn't risk being caught out in the open. Ahead, he spotted a small clearing with a cluster of rocks. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Jack made his way toward it, careful to keep an eye on the surroundings. He needed to stay out of sight. He gently laid Rana down on the ground, her breathing still shallow but steady. Jack pulled his pack from his back and rummaged through it. There wasn't much, just the basics, rations, water, and a first aid kit. He set about tending to her wounds, doing his best to apply pressure to the bleeding gash on her side. Rana stirred, her hand twitching slightly, and Jack paused, looking down at her. Her eyes were open now, though her gaze seemed distant. "You should rest," Jack said quietly, his voice soft but firm. "I'll take care of you, just stay with me." Rana's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She closed her eyes again, and Jack could feel the weight of her exhaustion, her body fighting against the injuries that threatened to take her life. He worked quickly, wrapping her wound as best as he could. His hands were rough, but he did what he could with the limited supplies. Once he was done, he checked the perimeter, his eyes scanning the shadows. The jungle was silent now, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The Empire's patrols were relentless. Jack took a seat nearby, his back against a tree. He pulled out a ration bar and broke it in half, setting one piece down beside Rana in case she woke up. He ate the other half quickly, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had happened back at the outpost. The rest of his squad had just left. No one cared about what happened to the rebels. No one cared about Rana. He clenched his fists. They had abandoned her. They had abandoned him. Jack couldn't let that go, not after everything they had been through. He wasn't going to let her die here alone in the middle of nowhere. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of movement. Jack's head snapped up, his senses immediately on alert. His hand went to his rifle, fingers tightening around the grip. The movement was subtle, but he had learned to trust his instincts in situations like this. The jungle wasn't quiet, it was filled with life, and most of that life didn't want to be found. The predator in the brush was closer now, its presence almost a palpable weight in the air. Jack's breath slowed as he waited, listening, watching. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a low growl. His heart raced. It was a creature, a large one, judging by the size of the disturbance in the undergrowth. Jack's eyes darted around for any sign of the animal, his mind calculating. He couldn't afford to engage in a fight right now, not when he had Rana to protect. The creature's growl was followed by the unmistakable sound of something crashing through the brush. Jack's instincts kicked in. He dove for his rifle, raising it just in time to see the massive shape of a jungle predator charging toward him. The creature was fast, its sleek, muscular body cutting through the trees like a shadow. Its eyes gleamed with hunger and its teeth glistened in the fading light. Jack fired, the shot echoing through the jungle. The creature howled in pain, but it didn't stop. It was still coming. He fired again, this time hitting its shoulder. The creature stumbled, giving Jack a brief moment to react. He pulled a knife from his belt and, using the last of his strength, threw it with perfect aim. The knife sank deep into the creature's side, and it let out a final, blood-curdling scream before collapsing. Jack stood frozen for a moment, breathing heavily, adrenaline pumping through his veins. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't afford to lose control now. He had to focus. He had to keep moving. He turned back to Rana, who hadn't moved an inch. Her eyes were still closed, but there was a faint rise and fall in her chest. Jack took a deep breath and pushed the thoughts of the creature from his mind. He had more pressing concerns. The sound of engines reached his ears. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound, hovercrafts, part of the Empire's patrols. They were close. Too close. Jack's mind raced. He had to get out of here. He couldn't risk being caught. Not now. He gathered up his things, carefully lifting Rana once again. She was heavier now, her body limp in his arms, but Jack didn't let that slow him down. He moved as quickly as he could, ducking low to avoid detection. His every step was calculated, each movement deliberate. The sound of the hovercrafts grew louder, but Jack kept pushing forward, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The jungle seemed to close in around him, the trees thickening as he moved deeper into the wilderness. The patrols were getting closer. Jack could hear their voices now, the mechanical hum of their engines filling the air. He couldn't let them find him, not when Rana's life was in his hands. He pushed on, determination flooding his veins. He would find a way. He had to. Jack moved through the jungle with quick, deliberate steps. Every muscle in his body was tense, and his heart beat fast in his chest. The sound of the Empire's hovercrafts had grown distant, but the adrenaline still coursed through his veins. He could still hear the hum of their engines in the back of his mind, a reminder that they were close. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now, not when Rana's life was in his hands. He glanced down at her, her face pale and strained. She was barely awake, her eyes fluttering open now and then, but not fully conscious. Jack could feel the weight of her body against his arms, the heat of her skin burning through his gloves. He had to keep moving, had to find shelter for the night, but he knew he couldn't go much longer at this pace. She needed rest. She needed medical care. But where could he go? What could he do? The jungle stretched out in front of him, a vast and endless maze of trees, vines, and darkness. Jack had no map, no guide. He was relying entirely on his instincts, and so far they had kept him alive. But instincts alone wouldn't get him through this. He needed more than that. He needed a plan. His eyes scanned the landscape as he moved, searching for anything that could help. The ground beneath his boots was uneven, and his legs were growing tired. His muscles ached from carrying Rana and running through the jungle, and he knew he was pushing himself to the limit. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't let the Empire find them. He couldn't let Rana die. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. Time seemed to blur in the darkness. The forest was thick with shadows now, the light from the setting sun long gone. Jack's eyes strained to see through the blackness, and his mind raced as he tried to think of a safe place to hide. His thoughts kept returning to the same question. Where could they go? Suddenly, through the trees, he saw something, a flicker of light, a distant glow. It wasn't much, but it was enough to catch his attention. Jack stopped, listening intently. The sound of a stream reached his ears, soft and steady, the kind of sound that could mask their movements. It was a risk, but it was better than wandering aimlessly through the jungle all night. He shifted his grip on Rana, moving towards the light. The terrain was difficult, but he kept his focus. The sound of rushing water grew louder as he got closer. Soon, he found himself at the edge of a small river, the water sparkling faintly in the dim light. Jack took a moment to catch his breath. He glanced around, looking for any sign of danger, but everything seemed still. The river could offer them cover, at least for the night. It was quiet here, hidden from view, the perfect place to rest and regroup. Carefully, Jack lowered Rana to the ground, laying her on a bed of soft leaves. He checked her wound again, his hands moving quickly but gently. The bleeding had slowed, but she was still weak. She needed more than just a bandage. She needed proper medical treatment. Jack had no supplies beyond what he carried in his pack, and they were running low. If he couldn't find a way to get her the help she needed, she wouldn't survive much longer. His mind raced. He had to think of something. There had to be a way to get her to safety. But how? As Jack sat there, lost in thought, Rana stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at him, her gaze unfocused. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her words slow and labored. "I don't understand. You're human." Jack's heart twisted at the question. He had no easy answer for her. How could he explain why he was risking everything to save her, to protect someone from a different world, a different species? How could he explain that it was the right thing to do, that no one should be abandoned in a time of need? "I don't know," Jack said quietly, looking down at her. "Maybe because it's the right thing to do, I couldn't just leave you behind." Rana stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak again, and Jack let the silence stretch between them. He didn't need her words to know what she was thinking. She was trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand why a human soldier would risk his life for her, a rebel from an enemy species. Jack wasn't sure he understood it himself, but what he did know was that he couldn't leave her, not after everything they had been through. Not after the way the others had turned their backs on her. He would protect her no matter what it took. He stood up slowly, checking their surroundings once more. The jungle was still. The river flowed steadily beside them, the sound of the water soothing like a lullaby in the chaos. But Jack knew they couldn't stay here forever. The Empire would send more patrols. They had to keep moving. "I'm going to find help," Jack said, his voice steady. "Stay here. I'll be back as soon as I can." Rana didn't respond, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. She was too weak to protest, too tired to argue. She simply closed her eyes again, her body sinking into the ground, exhaustion taking over. Jack knew he couldn't leave her for long. He had to find someone who could help them. He couldn't do this alone. With one last look at her, he turned and disappeared into the jungle, moving as quietly as he could. Every step was calculated, every sound a potential threat. His rifle was at the ready, his senses sharp as he moved deeper into the forest. The night was cold, and the air felt heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Jack knew the Empire would stop at nothing to track them down. They would use every resource at their disposal, every advantage. But Jack wasn't afraid, not anymore. He had made a promise to Rana, and he intended to keep it. He wasn't going to let her die, not like this. The further he went, the more uncertain the path became. The jungle grew denser, the shadows stretching further as the night wore on. Jack's mind kept racing, thoughts of Rana, of his squad, of everything they had left behind. In the distance, he saw a flicker of light again. It wasn't much, but it was enough to catch his attention. He paused, watching the glow. Was it another patrol, or something else? It was hard to tell in the dark. He moved closer, keeping low, his hand gripping the rifle tightly. As he neared the light, he slowed his pace, making sure he wasn't detected. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. The light grew brighter as he got closer, and soon he realized what it was. A small camp. A rebel camp. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the help he had been looking for. But as he stepped into the camp, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The place was quiet, too quiet. There were no voices, no sounds of movement. Jack's instincts told him to be cautious, but it was too late. A voice called out from the darkness, "Who's there?" Jack froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. The voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and demanding. Jack froze, his hand still hovering over his weapon. His senses screamed at him to act, but something told him to wait. The voice had a certain calmness to it, a weight that suggested this wasn't an immediate threat, but Jack wasn't taking any chances. "Who's there?" the voice repeated, this time softer but still firm. Jack stepped forward cautiously, keeping his rifle close but lowering it slightly to show he wasn't in immediate danger. "I'm not here to fight," he called out into the darkness. "I'm just looking for help. My friend is hurt. She needs medical assistance." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for a response. His mind raced. He had hoped, prayed that he would find help here, but what if these rebels weren't what he thought? What if they didn't care about him or Rana? What if they had their own agenda? A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall and lean, a soldier's build but with the quiet elegance of someone who had spent a lifetime in the wilderness. The man's face was hidden in the darkness, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, glinted in the low light. "You're human," the figure said, voice almost a whisper. Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He couldn't blame the rebel for being cautious. After all, humans had been part of the empire that had caused so much suffering for the alien species. It was only natural that they would be suspicious of him. "I'm Sergeant Jack Callahan," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't want trouble. I just need help for her." He gestured toward the direction where he had left Rana by the river. The rebels stared at him for a long moment, eyes flicking between Jack and the direction he pointed. Then, with a soft grunt, the rebel turned and motioned for Jack to follow. "Come with me," the rebel said, his tone neutral. "We'll take a look at her." Jack breathed a quiet sigh of relief. He followed the man through the camp, weaving between tents and makeshift barricades, the sounds of hushed conversations and quiet movements all around him. This place wasn't like the military outposts Jack was used to. It felt different, less structured, more raw, as if the people here were more focused on survival than anything else. The rebel led him to a small medical tent at the far end of the camp. Inside, a woman was busy working at a makeshift table, her hands moving quickly as she prepared supplies. Her eyes met Jack's, and for a moment he saw the same wariness there. She had every reason to be suspicious of him, but Jack wasn't going to let that stop him. "This is Dr. Vela," the rebel said, gesturing to the woman. "She's the one you need." Jack nodded his thanks. He laid Rana down gently on the medical table, the woman immediately stepping forward to assess the injury. Her eyes quickly scanned the wound on Rana's side, and her fingers moved with practiced precision. "She's lost a lot of blood," Dr. Vela said, her voice calm but urgent. "But she's not beyond help." Jack watched as Dr. Vela worked quickly, preparing a set of tools from her bag. Her movements were confident, efficient, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes, a weight that suggested she had seen too much suffering in her life. Jack could see the same exhaustion in the faces of the other rebels around him. They had all been fighting for so long. "How much more could they take? How long has she been like this?" Dr. Vela asked, her tone softening as she looked at Jack. "Just a few hours," Jack said, his voice tight. "She was left behind by my team and I couldn't just leave her. You did the right thing, Doctor." Vela interrupted, glancing up at him briefly. "The Empire doesn't care about people like her. They never have." Jack swallowed, his throat dry. He hadn't expected to find someone who understood. "I don't care who she is. She's just human or alien, it doesn't matter. She's someone who needs help." Dr. Vela didn't respond at first. She focused on the wound, her hands steady as she cleaned it and applied a bandage. Jack stood silently, watching her work, his mind racing. The rebel who had led him here stood near the entrance of the tent, arms crossed, eyes still watching Jack with suspicion. Jack couldn't blame him. He would be cautious too if the roles were reversed. The silence in the tent grew thick, broken only by the sounds of Dr. Vela's movements. Jack's mind kept drifting back to his team, to Commander Davies. The moment they had left him behind, Jack had known that he couldn't go back. There was no way he could face them again, not after what they had done. And now, standing here in the rebel camp, he realized something. The mission, the war, it was never just about fighting the enemy. It was about choosing the right side. And maybe, just maybe, the right side wasn't where he thought it was. "Is she going to be okay?" Jack finally asked, his voice quiet, full of uncertainty. Dr. Vela paused, her hands stilling for a moment. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "She'll make it," she said softly, "but she needs rest. She's strong, but her body needs time to recover." Jack nodded, relief flooding through him. He hadn't realized just how much he had been holding his breath until that moment. He took a step back from the table, not wanting to get in the way. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Dr. Vela gave him a small, tight smile. "We help each other here, that's all we can do." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this war wasn't lost after all. Maybe, just maybe, he had found a place where people cared about more than just survival. "I'll stay here with her," Jack said, his eyes on Rana as she lay unconscious on the table. "She's my responsibility." The rebel who had led him to the camp took a step forward, his gaze softening just a fraction. "We all have our responsibilities," he said, his voice quieter now. "But you're not alone in this. We're all fighting the same fight." Jack nodded, his mind still reeling. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose. He wasn't just some soldier following orders. He was part of something bigger now. "Thank you," Jack said again, looking at the rebel. "I won't forget this." The rebel nodded. "None of us will." As the hours passed, Jack sat by Rana's side, watching over her as she slept. The camp around him was quiet, but Jack could hear the sounds of the rebels moving in and out, preparing for the next phase of the fight. There was no time to rest, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel completely alone. He had made the right choice, and he wasn't going to stop now. He was in this for the long haul. The night passed slowly, and Jack barely slept. He sat by Rana's side, his eyes flicking back and forth between her and the shadows outside the medical tent. The camp was quiet, but he knew better than to think they were safe. The Empire's forces were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they tracked them down. He couldn't let his guard down, not now. The soft hum of the jungle at night was punctuated by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of unknown creatures. Jack's body ached from the long hours of travel, his muscles stiff from carrying Rana and moving through the dense forest. But none of that mattered. What mattered was keeping her alive, keeping them both alive. The rebels in the camp had been kind, but Jack knew they couldn't stay here forever. This was a temporary shelter, and sooner or later the Empire would find them. Jack had seen enough of their tactics to know that they wouldn't hesitate to wipe out anyone who stood in their way. Rana's breathing was steady now, her face less pale than it had been earlier. Dr. Vela had worked tirelessly through the night, stitching up her wounds and giving her the care she needed. Jack had never seen a woman work with such focus, her hands sure and quick as she moved from one task to the next. There was a quiet strength in her, something that reminded Jack of his own determination to do what was right. But as the hours ticked by, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Empire was coming and they needed to leave. Rana might be stable for now, but they couldn't wait forever. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting soft rays over the camp. Jack stood up slowly, stretching his legs and trying to shake off the exhaustion that had settled in his bones. He glanced at Rana one more time, her face still relaxed in sleep, and then turned to the entrance of the tent. A figure stood outside, silhouetted against the light. Jack recognized the rebel who had led him to the camp the night before. The man's face was grim, his eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced caution. "You need to come with me," the rebel said, his voice low. Jack nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. "What's going on?" "The Empire's scouts are close," the rebel replied. "We have to move now." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped they had more time, but hope wasn't something the Empire allowed. They would never give up, and if they found the camp, it would be over. "Are the others ready?" Jack asked, his mind already racing. "They've been preparing," the rebel said. "We can't wait much longer. They'll be here within the hour." Jack turned back to the tent. He couldn't leave Rana behind, not when she was so close to recovery. But they didn't have much of a choice. The rebels had their own fight to win, and they couldn't afford to wait for her to fully recover. "I'll stay here with her," Jack said, his voice firm. "You go. I'll make sure she's safe." The rebel hesitated for a moment, looking from Jack to the unconscious alien woman on the table. There was no question in his eyes. He knew Jack was right, but still the rebel's voice was low when he spoke again. "We'll cover your escape route," but you'll need to move fast. We don't have time to lose. Jack nodded and turned to Dr. Vela, who was standing by the table, wiping her hands on a cloth. She had been quiet since the night before, but Jack could see the strain in her eyes. She, too, knew the danger they were in. I need to get her to a safe place, Jack said to Dr. Vela, his voice urgent. We don't have much time. Dr. Vela met his gaze, her eyes hard and tired but resolute. I can't move her far yet, she said softly, but you can't stay here. Jack took a deep breath. We'll go together. I'm not leaving her behind. Dr. Vela didn't argue. She knew that Jack wasn't going to change his mind. With a nod, she moved to gather her medical supplies, her movements swift and efficient. Jack's gaze flicked to the entrance again. The rebel was still waiting. We need to move now, the rebel urged. Jack glanced down at Rana, her face still pale but at least breathing easier. He gently adjusted the makeshift blanket over her, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. He didn't know where they would go, but he knew they had to leave now. The longer they stayed in one place, the more likely it was that the Empire would catch up with them. Without another word, Jack lifted his pack, ready to move. Doctor. Vela handed him a small medkit, and he tucked it into his bag. As he walked to the entrance of the tent, he gave Rana one last look. She needed time to recover, but the fight wasn't over yet, and Jack wasn't going to let her face it alone. The rebel led him through the camp, the two of them moving quickly but quietly. The rest of the rebels were already packing up their things, readying for the next phase of the fight. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency building within him. He had to get out of here and fast. They moved through the thick underbrush, staying low to the ground, careful to avoid any sound that might draw attention. The camp was soon far behind them, but Jack could still feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. The Empire would be searching for them, and they had to keep moving. It wasn't long before they reached a small clearing. The rebel who had led them here stopped, holding up a hand to signal for them to wait. Jack crouched beside him, his senses on alert. He could hear the distant hum of hovercraft engines, the unmistakable sound of Empire patrols drawing near. He didn't know how long they had, but it wasn't long enough. We're not far from the extraction point, the rebel said, his voice low. Once we get there, you'll be able to get off planet, but until then we have to stay quiet. Jack nodded, his mind already calculating the next steps. They couldn't afford to be careless. One mistake and they'd be caught. The minutes dragged on as they crouched in the clearing, waiting for the patrols to pass. Jack's body ached from the tension, but he kept his focus. His eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings, his ears straining to catch any sounds that might signal the approach of the enemy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds of the hovercrafts grew fainter. Jack could breathe again, but he knew they couldn't stop. They had to keep moving. The rebels stood up, motioning for Jack to follow. They continued through the dense jungle, the path narrowing as they approached the extraction point. Jack's heart raced as they got closer, his thoughts still on Rana. He had made a promise and he wasn't going to break it. He wasn't going to let her down, and when they finally reached the extraction point, Jack saw a small ship waiting in the distance. The rebels had done it. They had made it. But there was no time to relax, not yet. Jack motioned to the rebel. I'll get her, you go ahead. The rebel nodded. Good luck, Sergeant, and thank you. Jack turned back, running toward the ship with all his strength, determined to make sure that Rana had a chance at survival. They had made it this far. They couldn't stop now.